Why don't we kick off episode 658 of the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear with the song The 40 Eaters. This comes from the brand new, and I mean it, brand new EP release from the band Desert Undertones. They're a surf band based out of Tucson, Arizona. The EP is called Massacre Canyon. You can find them at desertundertones.bandcamp.com. They just released this a couple of days ago on May 1st. Check them out when you're done listening to this episode of Monster Kid Radio. I am your writer, host, and producer, Derek M. Cook, and I'm thrilled to have you here because we are finally doing our Dawn of the Dead episode. Monster Kid Radio crashed a screening of Dawn of the Dead at the Hollywood Theater in Portland, Oregon, and I'm bringing to you what resulted from that. We met up with a couple of Monster Kid Radio irregulars, Chris McMillan and Matt Rashleigh, and I was there with my wife, Beth. So the four of us watched Dawn of the Dead with a whole bunch of other people, of course, and had a grand time. So stay tuned for that coverage. Of course, it would not be an episode of Monster Kid Radio without Kenny's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. And I was pretty surprised to find that he was able to find some Dawn of the Dead material to discuss from Dawn of the Dead in Famous Monsters of Filmland. So we've got that coming up. Plus, we have a very special Beta Capsule review from Mark MATZKE'S. Why is it very special? Well, this is the note that he included with his segment submission. Unbelievable. That's it for Return of Ultraman. I love this series, especially when the Cicada family is fully intact. The Kaiju are sometimes iffy, but Return of Ultraman really did cement the franchise in the pop culture, thankfully. Now, I don't know if he meant for this to be read on the show, but I'm going to go ahead and read it anyway. Derek, I'm absolutely willing to continue with Ultraman Ace, but I want to give you the opportunity to let me know if you want the Beta Capsule review to keep going. Well, Mark, first of all, thank you. This is the final Beta Capsule review of The Return of Ultraman. And of course, I would love for you to continue. If you have the time and the inclination and the ultra drive to do it, bring on Ultraman Ace, my friend. I love having the Beta Capsule review as part of the show, and I've had a lot of people tell me that it's expanded their love, or at least their awareness, of all things Ultraman. Even Beth, when she's hanging out in the office with me when I'm editing the show, she will hear the segment, and she starts getting interested in Ultraman even more, and it's just been wonderful. So please, Mark, if you feel up to it, you always got a place here at the Beta Capsule review. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. We've got the last episode of The Return of Ultraman to talk about. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to Kenny's bit. We're going to get to the Dawn of the Dead experience. And we're going to get to just a real quick email that we had come in from one of the listeners.
Have something you'd like to share with Monster Kid Radio? You can email the podcast at monsterkidradio@gmail.com. Or you can call and leave a voicemail at 360-524-2484. Here's some listener feedback now.
It's short, it's sweet, it's to the point. It's from listener William H. Finally found time to watch Return of the Vampire with Lugosi after listening to one of your older episodes. You were right. It's a wonderful old film. I've enjoyed the latest episodes too. You and Beth do a great job. William, thank you for writing in. I appreciate it. Anytime somebody writes in and has something to say about Beth, I make sure that I share that with her. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and forward this off to her right now so she can read it on her own when she has an opportunity to dive into her email. And yeah, it is a wonderful film. Return of the Vampire is so good. All right, let's go ahead and get into the rest of the show. Here we go.
Let's prepare for a landing, Brad.
Okay.
In a 40G gravity atmosphere, strange thing happens to man's body and mind. Barry Sullivan and Norma Bengell take you into the most fantastic science fiction adventure ever filmed.
Emergency! Emergency! Conditions desperate. Little chance of survival. Help us.
Mark, look!
What have you got?
The Galliot.
Bert, get me a fix on this right now. Wes, Brad, controls.
Planet of the vampires. Harboring a form of life worse than death. Planet of the bloodless. creatures who take men's bodies, but attack like vampires.
I'll tell you this, if there are any intelligent creatures on this planet, they're our enemies.
In this outer space world, the living dead try to escape into life.
Alice.
No, just his body. And I'm just one of many beings on this planet. And we're fighting to survive. It's imperative that our race continue to exist. We arranged for several of you to kill each other so that we could take over your bodies. You are our last chance.
No, never. We'll all of us give up our lives to save our own race.
Welcome to a night of total terror. Night of the living dead. The dead who live on living flesh. The dead whose haunted souls hunt the living. The living whose bodies are the only food for these ungodly creatures. Night of the living dead. More shattering than your strangest nightmare.
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Return of Ultraman, Episode 51, The 5 Oaths of Ultra. Original air date, March 31st, 1972. Alien Bat has kidnapped Rumiko and Jiro, hoping to lure Go and Ultraman into a trap at Tao Stadium. After dreaming of first Ultraman's defeat at the hands of alien Zeton, Go rushes to the arena where he's confronted by Alien Bat and Zeton, and learns of the Ultra Annihilation Plan, a strategy to wipe out the Ultra Brothers, already underway. Zeton is unleashed on Tokyo, eliciting a response from Monster Attack Team, and with their attention diverted, Bat blows up their headquarters, leaving them with only one MAT arrow and 10 minutes of fuel with which to rescue Jiro and Rumiko, who will be executed at 5 o'clock, according to the alien force. Go flies the mission, crash-landing his way into a transformation into Ultraman to do battle with his deadliest enemy and a kaiju-sized bat, with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. Episode 51 brings the third Ultraman series to a dramatic, heart-wrenching conclusion, wasting no time in setting up the ultimate rematch, a showdown with Zeton. The story begins with a flourish, a dream sequence in which a wedding between Rumiko and Go is interrupted by Alien Bat, but when Rumiko awakens, she's reminded that she really has been kidnapped by the Bat, along with Jiro, and then Go has his own dream about first Ultraman, reviewing the only time he ever lost. Then it's non-stop action the rest of the way, but a sense of foreboding and potential loss is set by the dreams, and true to the franchise roots, the final outcome is not necessarily a happy one, especially when the nature of the 5 Oaths of Ultra are revealed. Under the practiced hand of director Ishiro Honda, yes, the director of Godzilla, this is an appropriately epic and touching series finale. This version of the Ultraman legend took the character to new heights of popularity, spawned a second monster boom in Japanese pop culture, and expanded an Ultra universe that continues to unfold right down to this present moment. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
Now, creatures from the grave battle each other to see who or what will be left. See all that remains in War of the Undead, a super triple shock treat starring your favorite ghastly ghouls. See the Prince of Vampires fight the King of Monsters in Dracula vs. Frankenstein. Then watch the maddest werewolf alive slash vampires to pieces in Frankenstein's Bloody Terror. And of course, see vampires slaughter savage cavemen in Horror of the Blood Monsters. It's triple terror, 3 times the thrills, torments, and tortures as bloodthirsty demons meet in the massacre of the century. Don't miss the greatest triple shocker of all. It's Dracula vs. Frankenstein, Frankenstein's Bloody Terror, and Horror of the Blood Monsters all in one super show. It's War of the Undead in blood-drenched color. Rated PG.
Hello there, Monster Kid Radio heads. This is Kenny with a look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. Today, we are going to hear what happened during the Monster Kid Radio crash of Dawn of the Dead. This film was surprisingly covered in FM 166 from August of 1980. It was surprising because the film itself could not be seen by the average young FM reader, with its self-imposed age restriction. Let's hear what was said about this classic zombie gore fest. Ketchup and spaghetti, a bloodbath and aftermath, the gore score, zombies foul, humans out. At least that's what it's all about, according to the film director, George A. Romero, creator of the creepy cult classic Night of the Living Dead. Now, 11 years after its release, the 38-year-old filmmaker has given into the demands of his fiendish followers and produced a $1 million sequel called Dawn of the Dead, a picture that makes its 1968 predecessor look positively pale pink by comparison. Actually, George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead is the second entry in a pre-planned trilogy of terror, which chronicle the vanquishing of the human race by the living dead zombies, who have a frightful fetish for flesh, human flesh. The first film describes the emergence of the zombies on Earth and progresses to an ending that leaves the creatures still roaming the countryside. Currently, Dawn of the Dead shows us how widespread the zombie plague has become, and how ineffective are our attempts at destroying them. The proposed final film in the trilogy, tentatively entitled Lunch, but sure to be changed before the picture is released, will tell how the zombies are overcome. Romero plans to have the beastly beings become domesticated. The article continues with a short review of Night of the Living Dead, and brief looks at the 2 Romero films between Night and Dead, The Crazies and Martin. It then ends with these comments about the main attraction. And so finally, 11 years and millions of box office dollars later, George Romero has produced Dawn of the Dead and given his fans exactly what they wanted. Well, maybe not exactly. Dawn of the Dead picks up where Night left off, but has no continuing characters, because they were all killed off in the first film, except of course the zombies themselves. But strangely, Romero has chosen to make Dawn more of a send-up of the previous film than a real honest-to-goodness, scarifying sequel. True, there are still the scenes of crunching bones and ripping flesh drenched in gouts of rich technicolor blood, enough to make even the Surgeon General shudder in his seat. But for every disemboweled abdomen, there's a laugh or two to help wash it down. Whether playing it tongue-in-cheek detracts from the film is up to each individual viewer. I know it's kind of hard to take, admits Romero, but it's exactly what I wanted. It's not a brooding nightmare experience. It's like a handshake with the audience. Romero's new film cost $1.5 million, most of which probably went for special effects, and was shot on location in a real shopping mall near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Because the mall was open 7 days a week, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., Romero and his crew could only film from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, and we had to clean everything up before they opened the mall, of course. Romero adds, that was a real chore. Dawn of the Dead follows the tracks of 4 human survivors as they make their way to a shopping mall where they hole up to live during the zombie plague. Before long, however, the hungry ghouls are at it again, attacking the mall with undaunted fervor. One of the fearless foursome gets bitten by a zombie and himself returns as an undead. To make matters worse, a notorious motorcycle gang ransacks the place, but most end up as man sandwiches anyway. By the end of the film, only 2 of the original 4 survivors are still alive. Will we meet them again? Will the ghoulish zombies make mincemeat of the remaining pair? Perhaps in Eclipse of the Livid Dead? That is all for this week's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. We will have more next time. For MKR, this is Kenny saying adios.
Taking me no place. Oh, man, this is easy.
They started something they can't stop. The crazy.
We're all concerned with Evans City, Mr. Hawks.
If we have to push the button, we just say the weapon went off.
Get me the president.
3,614 people are trapped by an unknown enemy. 5 are on the run. Can they escape the spreading fury of the crazies?
You can make it. I know it.
Watch it, Bucky! This is exactly the kind of thing we're trying to prevent.
The crazies. Rated R.
This is Count Vlad, but you may recognize me by my more familiar name, Count Dracula, and I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. In your parlance, you might call these revelations spoilers. You know how the children of the night, monster kids, can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned, and don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
The weather was perfect. It was a mid-afternoon in the middle of April, and my wife Beth and I were making our way to the Hollywood Theater. The Hollywood Theater is in the Hollywood District in Portland, Oregon. In fact, the Hollywood District is named after the Hollywood Theater. The Hollywood Theater was there first. The Hollywood Theater has been a mainstay of Portland since the 1920s. At one point, Portland, Oregon actually boasted the greatest number of movie theaters in a city this side of the Mississippi. And the Hollywood Theater is one of those theaters, and it's stuck around. Unlike so many of the other theaters in town, it still stands. And over the years, they've shown a number of different types of film, different film programming. They've had different missions. And the mission of the Hollywood Theater today is to show us the original 1970s film, Dawn of the Dead. Now, I'm not going here by myself. As I said, my wife Beth was with me, but we were also going to meet up with some friends. I set up a Facebook event, a Monster Kid Radio crash, so to speak, to hopefully see this film with a group of like-minded individuals. Well, a couple of people did turn up. After we had pizza at the nearby pizza place, we all funneled into the movie theater, bought some popcorn, took our seats, and waited for the movie to begin. When the Hollywood Theater was first constructed, it only had one screen because most movie houses only had one screen back then, and it used to seat over 1,000 people. Since then, the Hollywood has divided their one screen into 3 screens. The main screen remained downstairs, and then upstairs they had 2 other screening rooms, much smaller screens. Well, Dawn of the Dead was being shown downstairs on the big screen, which made myself, Beth, Chris McMillan from The Shadow Over Portland, and Matthew Rashleigh very happy. While we were waiting for the movie to begin, we spoke a little bit about what we were expecting from this screening and our history with Dawn of the Dead.
I think the first George Romero zombie movie I ever saw was the original Night of the Living Dead. It was on PBS. And since it was on PBS, my mom let me watch it because it's like, well, it's PBS.
That's Chris McMillan from The Shadow Over Portland over at shadowoverportland.blogspot.com. This website is where you're going to want to go to find out about all the horror happenings in the entire Pacific Northwest region.
And then, of course, Dawn of the Dead came out, VHS, and that's when I saw it. I was old enough at that point, Mom couldn't stop me. So I saw that on VHS. I remember seeing Day of the Dead in the theaters at one point when it first came out. I think it was at the Hazelden Trice Cinemas, which is gone now. It's gone, but I think they showed it. I know they showed Zombie, the Italian ripoff. But yeah, I've been watching. I've seen, I think, every George Romero zombie movie at this point. Dawn of the Dead is number one. It's just amazingly well done. The satire on American society is perfect. You've got Tom Savini really stretching what he could do at that time. As far as his effects go, Day beats it. Day is just his major showcase. But Dawn was, at the time, just jaw-dropping.
We left for lunch, and we were hanging out at the pizza place still before the singing area. You told us that you'd never seen this little experience.
Never. So I am so looking forward to it because it is so hard to find anywhere now. Fortunately, I've got like 2 copies of it at home. Well, 4 if you count the 3-disc collector's edition. And I'm sure that like someone like Shout Factory would just jump at the chance to release it. But I've read various reasons. One of them is because of the 3D version, the rights are kind of tied up with that person who did it or something. I don't know. That's just what I read online, and we all know everything online is true. But the major thing is this is it's being shown all over in different theaters, throughout the Northwest. And if you get a chance to see it on the big screen, I would say do it. I haven't seen it yet on the big screen, but I know I'm going to love it.
Matt Rashleigh is one of my oldest friends. He's somebody that I met back in film school, and we've actually made quite a few movies together. Probably only finished 2 of them, but we spent a lot of time on set with movie cameras and spent a lot of time talking about what kind of movies we love, and of course, watching movies. And if you're a member of the various Monster Kid Radio socials on Facebook, you'll see that Matt has been doing a lot of deep diving into classic horror cinema. He usually, at least once a week, will post his thoughts and his reviews of a classic monster movie, the kind of movies that we talk about here on Monster Kid Radio. He continued that tradition, getting prepared to watch Dawn of the Dead by checking out some other classic zombie movies.
I decided that with this special opportunity to catch Dawn of the Dead on the big screen, I wanted to do a little bit of homework. I went on a zealous zombie odyssey. I went back and I watched some films that I hadn't seen in ever. I Walked with a Zombie, which was really powerful, had lots of atmosphere. I was really impressed with it. It was one of those classic zombie films going back to voodoo and being in the Caribbean. Also, I was surprised to see that there was some social commentary, even in the early zombie films, kind of pointing out kind of things that aren't right with our culture and using zombies to address it. Next, I watched Plague of the Zombies, Hammer film. One thing I decided this year is that I need more zombie films and more Hammer movies. And with this, I was able to do both. I was really surprised by how great it was for a movie I hadn't had any real prior knowledge of. Watching it, I'd put it right up there with some of the best Hammer films made. The zombies are genuinely scary. The pacing is great. The atmosphere is great. Following that, I dived into a movie with many titles, The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, which was stunning. The zombies in it, or you're starting to get the look kind of going in the direction of where Romero picks it up. They're genuinely dead. They're brought back to life by, that's a human hubris, thinking that we can deal with pests and unknowingly bringing back the undead. It really put me in the right mindset for this. I watched Night of the Living Dead, which I hadn't seen since I was a teenager, watching it on VHS tape. And wow, as an adult, that movie works on so many more levels than I realized originally. Like as a kid, I just thought it was scary and cool and edgy and black and white. But seeing it as an adult, you're like, whoa, there's some allegories here. Not only is it scary and high-paced, but there's a lot going on. I'm ready. It's put me in the mindset I'm ready for Dawn of the Dead.
You and I have known each other for a long time. We went to film school together. Yeah, you mentioned earlier that we must have talked about this movie, but you hadn't watched this Dawn of the Dead. And we didn't ever watched it together.
Right.
We probably watched that Spring Race documentary over the movie.
Yeah.
But we haven't watched Dawn of the Dead. When was the last time I saw Dawn of the Dead?
I'm going to have to say it's been at least 30 years. So, I have loose memories of it, but watching it from beginning to end, it's kind of vague in my memory. And so it's almost like watching it again for the first time, especially in a room full of people wanting to see it on the big screen.
Well, I want to check in with you after the movie as well, kind of get your thoughts on it. After you're done watching Dawn of the Dead today and after today, are you going to continue watching zombie movies, or where do you rate your zombie film fandom now?
Oh, I'm definitely on board. I definitely want to see some other zombie films after this. So I'm excited to see kind of where this leaves me and what direction I'll go to next.
After chatting a little bit with Matt and Chris, they turned around and put the microphone in my face and started asking me what I thought about what we were about to see and my overall Dawn of the Dead thoughts. Dawn of the Dead, I saw it most recently as the 3D release. It came out a couple of years ago. It was okay, a little dark, didn't really hit me the same way as it normally would at home. Dawn of the Dead's pretty darn important to me. It's my second favorite Romero film. Chris said earlier that the effects of Day of the Dead are superior, and they are. But Dawn of the Dead, I feel like, is a more pure vision of what Romero was trying to do. I think Night is fantastic. It's a classic for a reason. Day of the Dead is fantastic. Of the original three, and I'll put Land of the Dead in there, I suppose. Of the four, Dawn of the Dead probably hits me the hardest, though. I love the characters in it. I love the journey that it has. It gives us so much. It's a scary movie. It's an apocalyptic movie. It's got moments of slapstick comedy. It's got romance. It's got drama. It's got the relationships, not just the romantic relationship, but the friendships coming together. The concept of found family is super important. It's all there in this film from beginning to end for me. And for whatever reason, this is the movie that taught me how movies were made. And I can boil it down to one particular exchange in this film. Right after they get into, maybe not right after, but when they're in the mall, there's a sequence where they're passing supplies back and forth to each other. And I believe it might be a can of Spam that one of them tosses off screen to another one. Cut. Then we go to a close-up or a medium shot of the other guy who's catching it. And for whatever reason, that sequence, knowing they were probably shot out of sequence, maybe not even on the same day, but because it is the same action happening and where the edit happened, that's where editing clicked in for me. That's how you edit a movie. That's why movies work and how it all comes together. I don't know if I'm describing it very well, but that is what made me understand how movies are made.
What's it like to be in a venue like the Hollywood Theater on its biggest screen?
I'm surprised it was on the big screen because the Hollywood's showing some first-run movies right now. I assumed we were going to be put upstairs, which is fine. They're decent screens too. But to see it on the big screen, we're going to have even more people in the audience, and movies are collectively viewed experience, or they can be, and they work best when they are, I feel like, especially when people in here are all excited about seeing the movie. We don't have a lot of people in here. It's just like, well, I guess I'm here to see a movie. People are here because they want to be here. They want to see this movie that's 45 years old. They want to see the restoration. The Hollywood Theater is a pretty special theater. I probably spent more time in this theater than any other theater in Oregon or Washington because of the many years that I've gone here for the Hollywood Theater hosting the Lovecraft Film Festival. Chris and I have spent many 3-day weekends in here and would have probably slept in the back on a cot if they would have let us because of the Lovecraft Film Festival. And I miss that experience. I haven't done that in a while. So to be here to see an older film that means so much, it's going to be pretty exciting. In fact, I think the last time we saw Day of the Dead on the big screen was in here at the Hollywood, in this theater on this screen, when they were showing Day of the Dead as part of the Zompire Film Festival, which was a spin-off of the Lovecraft Film Festival. It's no longer a thing, but it was one day they did zombie movies, one day they did vampire movies. And I think that year they did Planet of the Vampires and Day of the Dead as the big tentpole pictures they built the rest of the festival around. I skipped Planet of the Vampires like an idiot, but I did make sure I saw Day of the Dead. And that was pretty cool to see on the big screen. Now, I've watched it at home. I've got it on Blu-ray. Got Dawn of the Dead in various formats. It's one of those movies that I used to buy in every new format, every new release, like Army of Darkness for Evil Dead. VHS, gotta have it. 2-disc set, gotta have that. Oh, there's a 3-disc collector's edition? Cool. Oh, they put it out in the UK on Blu-ray in a steelbox? Sign me up. I gotta buy them all. And, maybe that wasn't financially responsible, but I do love this film.
Rest in peace, George Romero. I've seen some interviews from the past, thanks to the internet, and he always seemed kind of surprised and shocked that people continue to talk about his movies. What do you think his reaction would be to this 45th anniversary re-release and so many people coming out to see it?
I think he's smiling right now.
I think he would appreciate it. I know that he liked talking about his films, and all the interviews that I saw with him and very limited interaction I had with him. I met him once at a Horror Hound weekend many, many moons ago, where I tried to tell him what my favorite Romero film of his is and try to have a moment with him. It didn't really go anywhere other than, oh, that's nice, thank you. But I can hear his laugh. He has a very distinct laugh, and I would imagine he's laughing about it now. And hopefully he's getting a buck or two. Hopefully he's making some money off of it, because the man deserves it, for everything that he did for indie filmmaking, horror filmmaking, regional filmmaking, guerrilla filmmaking, all of it. And, of course, giving us the modern-day zombie. I think he would appreciate it. I'd like to think so. We used to call him Uncle Romero on Mail Order Zombies, so Uncle Romero, thank you. And I can't wait to watch your movie. And with that, we sat back and let Dawn of the Dead hit us. And it was an amazing experience. And I was eager to connect with my friends after the movie to chat a little bit more.
I thought it was amazing. It was like seeing it for the first time. I mean, the restoration was beautiful, but just being able to see the actors' expressions much clearer. There were scenes where it's like, wow, they are really doing a fine job of selling this. And I mean that in a positive way, because all 4 actors did a better job on the big screen than you can see on even a big-sized TV, if that makes sense.
That did make sense. And I did ask Chris if there was anything that he noticed in the film, seeing it projected on the big screen this way, that he'd never noticed before.
Other than seeing the actors' facial expressions in a really better way, there's this scene where Steven's trying to join up the other two, and he's in that area and he gets the pistol. I'd never seen the zombie walk by the window. Either, was an old VHS copy I was watching, or it's just, it's so brief and so quick that, I didn't remember seeing that. I'm like, wow, that's really, okay. They're setting it up nice.
Chris is referring to the scene in the film in which Steven is in the catacombs of the mall and looking for, anything of use, and finds some maps of the ductwork and all of that. And there's a zombie walking around in the background. I can vouch for him and say that while I had noticed the zombie in the background in that shot before, I did also notice my wife's reaction to seeing that zombie walk around in the background while we watched it this time. And that was quite nice. The reason I asked Chris this question is because I myself did find myself noticing small details in the movie that I had never noticed before. And I don't know if it's because I've just not been paying attention or the copies that I have at home haven't been up to snuff, but this was the first time that I noticed that when Peter is executing the zombies in the basement of the tenement building, he's crying. I had never noticed that before. Speaking of zombies being executed, Chris did then talk about the blood and the zombies and the gore.
The gore effects look so good. I mean, you can say what you want about the color of the blood. I know Savini was upset with it, and he was upset with some of the skin tones from the zombies, but man, those effects still hold up. And they look so good on the big screen.
That was one concern that I had, is that we were going to see it so cleaned up. We were going to see the seams.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of the zombie makeup itself?
Well, it was like when we went and saw War of the Worlds over at the big screen at OMSI.
Chris has a heck of a memory. That was episode 422 of Monster Kid Radio, and that came out back in June of 2019. Check the archives.
And you could see the strings on the spaceships because it's a digital version. There were some places where you could see that the zombies weren't completely made up, or where the makeup had worn off during the shoot and they just didn't get around to touching it up. But as far as the big set pieces, I didn't see any seams. Those look really good. And it's really cool that a movie that's 45 years old was still able to elicit gasps from members of the audience. I mean, you could hear a couple of times people going, "Oh," which just made my day. That's why I love going to the movies. You know, if it's you get people who have seen it and just want to relive it like I did. You get people who have never seen it before, and they are basically doing what you probably did the first time you saw it.
And we'll talk a little bit about the first time I saw Dawn of the Dead here in a little bit. But let's get to Matt and get his thoughts on having just seen Dawn of the Dead on the Hollywood big screen.
It exceeded my expectations. I agree with Chris in the fact that the remaster was tastefully done, that it still had the look of the time. And as you said, like the concern about seeing the seams, of kind of seeing through the set, and that didn't happen. Like, I was totally engaged in the story, and it was the perfect touch. And seeing it in a room full of other Romero fans or Dead fans, it was a good place to be and a great way to see it. It seemed like the people that were there were certainly enthusiastic.
A lot of Romero shirts in there.
Yes, indeed. And you know, I'm sure all those people have seen the movie before. Who knows how long? I don't know if it's been as long as it's been for me. But you know, some of the gore effects and when they were when the zombies were consuming the people, like, I heard a lot of oohs and cringes and people averting their eyes. And I don't know if that goes to the fact that it was on a big screen or that it was remastered or if it was just the moment in the movie. But I think everybody had a good time.
Is there a different theater or a better theater to see it in?
Not for me. The Hollywood Theater is such a great venue. Everyone in Portland's lucky to have it. It's got its own atmosphere and feel, being a historic building and being a place where, you know, people who love movies go. So it's kind of a church for film, and there's all kinds of respected faiths, including zombie movies.
Okay, I want to ask you about the ending. For a long time, it was rumored that there was a different ending. Some photographs have turned up, even though Romero has kind of said, no, this is what it was intended. Originally, they all die. Peter does kill himself, and Francine or Franny puts her head through the helicopter blades. What did you think of the end?
I'm okay with the end. Her leaving made sense. If Peter took his own life, I could have been okay with that. Kind of the sense that he had a full experience in the mall and it turned, you know, in a way that he didn't expect. So I think it would have been true to character. Her being pregnant and leaving and making it out, I thought was a good place to have an ending.
What about the heroic music there?
It's definitely of its time. It took me a little bit out of the moment, but it's still a great movie with a great ending. I did find it a little disturbing, I guess, slightly, in having an empty mall in this day and age where malls are sort of empty. And the fact that they're isolating and able to get whatever they want, which is sort of interesting too, post-pandemic, where a lot of us were isolating at home, but instead of ransacking a mall, we'd order stuff online and have it dropped at our door. And it's just interesting to kind of have that life experience and then to watch this movie and sort of see parallels. I always laugh so hard, and I've seen it as a cutaway scene, but the part of when they're first in the mall and you're cutting with that cheery music of zombies aimlessly wandering the mall and seeing the mannequin heads. Like, I think that's probably one of the best moments in cinema, period. It's so fun but reflective of Romero and what he thought of that time.
Yeah, when you mentioned that, there was one scene that now that you mention it, it's like a throwback to it, because there's the scene where Franny is dolling herself up like an old Western gangster mall, and they do the same intercut with her in the exact same mannequin head, kind of bringing out the idea of what have we done to ourselves. They're basically, to use a line from the TV show, they're basically becoming the Walking Dead. And the intercut, when you mentioned that, and I'm like, oh, and he did it again with Franny, just made it even more powerful. I totally...
Well, and that's a great insight to point out at the end, because I was kind of shocked in the moment, but to reflect on it and to have that juxtaposition of what we saw early and then seeing her later in makeup and having that cut, it's quite something.
Now, I know I've mentioned that my wife was along with us as well, watching and enjoying the movie, but you haven't heard from her yet. And that's because I suspected that she and I were going to talk a lot longer than we were comfortable hanging out outside the Hollywood Theater that afternoon. While the weather was beautiful, we're just kind of hanging out with some equipment outside the Hollywood Theater. Let's go home and talk about the movie after we've had a chance to really let it sink into our brains. And you had seen this before.
Yes, but probably 30 years ago.
Do you remember how you saw it? Was it video projected onto a white cafeteria wall? I actually saw it in high school. We used to do like movies, and so we'd have these movie night lock-ins, and you could get parents to sign off on movies, and we kind of snuck this one in there, and nobody really knew that. Like, we had other horror movies in there, but not nearly as bad. And basically we snuck it in there under the guise of, well, it's from the 70s. It's like before they really got bad. It's not like these new Chainsaw Massacre ones, Texas Chainsaw Massacre's from the 70s.
Well, I know, but we said it's like not one of these chainsaw ones, And also, we showed the beginning thing where it said that there's no sex. Like, we had a still picture of it.
Okay.
To show like the associate principal who got to okay the list. And so all he cared about was that there was no sex in the movie. Like, he was all for violence. He was a big like gun-toting dude and stuff, and he carried a gun on him at school. I remember because it was really weird because of course the year I graduated, that's when Columbine happened and everything. And so I do distinctly remember him carrying his piece on his hip as an associate principal. So he didn't have any problem with the violence. That wasn't an issue.
Was there a chaperone when you guys were doing the movies?
Yes, but we would do these overnight lock-ins, and so usually the adults would go fall asleep, and so we watched this at like 2 a.m.
My God, I can't even imagine.
The best part was our high school had originally been designed as one of those California pods that have outdoor connections, which of course had to be covered with walkways because I grew up here in Washington State where it rains, 2/3 of the year. But they had eventually enclosed those walkways with halls and then put like lockers in them and stuff. And so it had a very shopping mall feel to it, which was just perfect, for watching it. Like, people wouldn't even, the girls were like, oh, I can go to the bathroom with me after, halfway through the movie. Nobody even wanted to go to the bathroom alone. Even some of the guys I noticed were going in groups. So, it was pretty funny.
I can't imagine.
I don't think any chaperones were awake. And we were all the goody two-shoes honors kids. So we kind of got away with stuff that we probably shouldn't have. I mean, on another one of them, we got Rocky Horror Picture Show through, so...
I'm shocked and I'm stunned. I discovered this movie on VHS when I got my driver's license. And I didn't get my driver's license right away, but when I got my driver's license, I was about 16 and a half or so. I was then able to drive myself to all the video stores in town.
Sure.
And open up memberships at all the video stores because I had a DVD. Right. So I started catching up for all the horror movies that I wasn't allowed to watch as a kid.
Maybe Les wasn't allowed to watch more. Parents wouldn't rent them for you, so you had no way to get a hold of them.
No, I wasn't allowed to watch R-rated films.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was something I was not allowed to do as a kid.
Interesting. No matter why they were R-rated?
Yeah, it was just R-rated, can't do it.
Because I had been allowed to watch some R-rated movies, especially ones where... Actually, you know what? My parents just didn't really care now that I think about it. I think I saw The Piano when I was 12. And I'd seen Dirty Dancing from, gosh, I can't remember a time where I didn't love the movie Dirty Dancing, so...
Is that rated R? Okay. Yeah, so I wasn't allowed to watch them, but when I turned 16 and I could start doing it on my own, then it was okay. And I went on a binge. One of my best friends since high school, his name was Scott. His name was actually Scott Morris, not the Scott Morris from Disney, Indiana, but a different Scott Morris.
You just collect them like trading cards?
Like Pokemon.
Like Pokemon, yeah.
He and I would go to all the video stores and rent all of them. I remember distinctly the night that we watched all the Hellraiser movies that had come out up until that point.
And where were you watching these? Because clearly it wasn't like in a room with your mom.
No, in the basement, in the house.
You had another TV.
We had another TV and another VCR.
Your house or his house?
My house.
Your house.
There's no way that Scott's parents would have been cool with us watching it over there.
All right, sounds like your parents wouldn't have been cool if they'd known.
This was after my parents had separated and divorced, so my mother had a lot of other things going on.
You got away with a lot.
I probably got away with a lot more than I should have in terms of the movies that I was watching.
And Kevin being a lot younger than you, she probably had her hands full with him.
Yeah, there was that too. But, we ended up renting all of these movies, and the Blockbuster Video, at the time it was called Giant Video, had a documentary called Scream Greats Volume 1. Tom Savini, master of horror effects. It was a video produced by Fangoria and Starlog Video, and I rented that one, as well as Volume 2, which was about Satanism in the movies. Wasn't nearly as good. But Volume 1 was this documentary about Tom Savini, and introduced me to what Tom Savini did and who he was. I had no idea. And, of course, there were a bunch of clips from a lot of his movies. Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Martin, a bunch of the other movies that he had worked on for Romero, Creep Show, things like that. And that was my introduction, and I ended up renting Dawn of the Dead, buying Dawn of the Dead on VHS, and I did eventually show it to Kevin, to my younger brother, before he was old enough.
And then how long did he have nightmares for?
Well, it wasn't a nightmare thing. He loved it, and we ended up getting him a copy of it on VHS as well. So I ended up watching this thing over and over and over again. The Scream Greats documentary I really liked. And I think I can admit to this now because one, Giant Video / Blockbuster Video doesn't exist there anymore.
Sure.
Statute of limitations.
Yeah.
I wanted to own Scream Greats Volume 1.
Uh-oh.
I copied it at home. But the copy wasn't great because they had copy protection.
Yeah.
So I opened up the case. I took the copy.
You didn't.
I did.
You gave them back the copy and you kept the good one?
I did.
What about like the stickers on the tape and stuff?
Well, they were easy to undo and restick and everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's...
I was an honor student too, and I got away with stuff that I shouldn't have gotten. I did things I shouldn't have done. I wasn't always a good kid.
Yeah, I don't see much honor in that, but okay, I get statute of limitations.
So I had that tape, and I brought it into one of my high school classes because I was talking about special effects with my applied physics teacher, Mr. Wallace.
Oh, yeah.
And he was interested and thought maybe we could watch it and learn how some of the special effects works using physics and science.
Now, let me be clear. When I saw it, it was on school property, but it was not during the school day. And there were certainly no teachers or administrators directly in the room watching it with us. Go ahead.
So I pop in Scream Greats, and it starts with Tom Savini doing this monologue. Sometimes I feel like an assassin.
Sometimes I feel like an assassin. People call me. I load up my car with all my goodies and my little toolbox and things, and I go some strange state and I kill people.
And while he's doing this monologue, he's showing clips of all the movies that he does where he kills people, like Friday the 13th Part 4 or Dawn of the Dead. And we got through that very beginning bit with all the bloodshed and all the gore. We get to the opening credits and Mr. Wallace says, "That's enough. Turn it off."
So it's so funny that you bring that up specifically, because I was watching another documentary about the making of Dawn of the Dead, and it had looked at Romero's past and people he'd worked with previously and things like that. And it was talking about when he wrote Dawn of the Dead, he actually was brought out to Rome by his Italian
Dario Argento
friend, yes, Dario Argento, and basically he and his then wife, are they still married? No,
but he's passed at this point.
Were they still married?
I don't think they were married when they made Dawn, but they did eventually get married, and then they did divorce as well. You're talking about Christine?
Yes, who was assistant director on who ended up being an assistant.
She has a cameo in Dawn of the Dead,
and has a cameo, yes, as many of the crew do.
Yeah,
in fact, so. Argento actually flew them out to Rome, put them up in his villa or whatever, really nice, and Romero was able to just write. And so he'd write for 2 to 3 days, then somebody would come pick up the pages, take them for translation because Argento does not speak English.
Yeah.
And while it was being translated, then they'd all go off and into the countryside or around Rome and sightsee for a day. He'd take them out to these big fancy dinners and take them out to, wine vineyards out in the hills and stuff. And then once the translation was back, then they'd go back to work where he'd start working on the stuff with the translation, and then George would go back and write some more pages, and they just did this for weeks and weeks. And a few weeks in, Tom Savini gets a telegram and it just says, "Start thinking of ways to kill people." And that's it. It's literally, that's his entrance into Dawn of the Dead, into the project. But
yeah,
I really liked that, it wasn't supposed to be a huge budget. They were trying to keep the whole thing under $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
The mall was actually owned by friends of Romero's, and so they were able to basically just use it.
As long as they got out on time.
As long as they got out on time.
They shot overnight.
Which that's huge cost savings there, obviously. And yeah, some of the hardest shots were some of the parking lot ones, the outside, because they wanted them when it was light, but they had very limited time when they could do that because, of course, the mall didn't close until after dark, typically. And so then there was very little time when there was enough light to look like daylight, but not have them all open yet and have people there and everything. Not just the customers, but staff who come in earlier. And so there were a lot of ways that he was able to save costs on that. Obviously, a lot of the set dressing and stuff was just there because it's the mall. It was just very interesting to see the whole way that he really got to do what he wanted. Whereas like Night of the Living Dead, he was very limited in budget. They were limited in time because it was a side gig for him and his friends at that point. It wasn't, his main job. But finally, Dawn of the Dead, he was able to put in some of those practical effects that he had learned about and been designing and working on for years. And so you get so much more creativity and so many more different ways of killing zombies. And I think that's really fun. And some of the extra things, everything from who's like, oh, let's put a helicopter in this. Another thing he said, another movie that had influenced him, or book, which then has also been done as a movie, I Am Legend.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And so you can see their little pieces, like some of the stuff with the helicopter, I feel like is a little reminiscent.
Well, and I Am Legend, he's gone on record, I Am Legend influenced Night of the Living Dead so much.
Right.
So much so that a lot of people call Last Man on Earth, the Vincent Price adaptation of that, a zombie movie versus a vampire movie, because there's so much of it that influenced Night of the Living Dead. I still think it's a vampire movie because it's a vampire story, but still.
Vampires, alive among the lifeless, that make the night hideous with their inhuman cravings. If they are not destroyed in the flaming pits of hellfire, or staked to the ground in the light of the sun, will the unbelievable become real? A world of inanimate zombies by day, irresistible, horrifying attackers by night. Can a zombie woman's hunger for love repopulate the earth?
What's a spectrum, don't you think, of undead? There's a spectrum of the undead.
Yeah, so zombie would be like at the bottom of the list, and then vampire. So vampire would be the top.
I mean, I'm dead. You just think left to right, then one's not worse than the other. But like you have your really extreme vampires like Dracula, who's like all powerful.
Right.
But then, like, even in, we were just talking about
Monster Mash.
Monster Mash, the new movie came out. Dracula's daughter does not have all of his powers in that. And that's often portrayed that way, that if one creature is making other creatures, the top one has more power. The old ones have more power than the other ones. So not surprising.
But did that happen with Tom Savini getting the message about think of some cool ways to kill people, and because we're about to do Day of the Dead.
Boy, Dawn.
That was for Day of the Dead too.
Oh,
they also did it for Dawn apparently. So yeah, I was doing a little bit of reading, and Richard Rubenstein doesn't get a lot of positive talk if you talk to people who were involved in Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Night Riders, and the other films. Rubenstein was Romero's partner in Laurel Entertainment, and it was a great partnership because we got some great movies out of it. Not sure exactly why people aren't as kind to him after the fact, but Rubenstein did say that his intention as the producer of Dawn of the Dead was to provide the paint, the canvas, and the palette, and then get out of the way, because this is Romero's pure vision. We're treating this like a European art film. He writes, he directs, he edits, he has final say. I'm just giving him all the raw material to make sure it can get done, and I'm going to let him run. And that's why I said earlier when we were talking outside the theater with Matt and Chris that I feel this is probably Romero's purest film, because he didn't have the budgetary issues, because he had money coming from whatever they had from Laurel, as well as Rubenstein's stuff, and then Argento's money coming in. He didn't have to scale all the way back to the way he did with Day of the Dead or anything like that. He was able to do what he wanted to do and put it all on screen in a way that I don't think he's ever really been able to do since.
No, definitely. The documentary I was watching, of course, had a number of pieces from an interview with Romero himself. And he said, on Dawn of the Dead, I was given a box. I was given the parameters. And as long as I stayed within the box, I could do whatever I wanted. And he gave the same freedom to a lot of his people on the project, like Tom Savini. He didn't limit that. He felt like he was not limited. And so he gave that same freedom to all of his specialists working in different areas, from makeup to sets to effects to whatever. And I think you can really see that. It's something I love when you get a great creative leader who has confidence in their team and is able to let their team really run with it and do their best work and not be restricted.
He doesn't come across as somebody that had to micromanage everybody.
Right, yeah.
Because he had experience doing the commercial filmmaking. And even as a kid, he would spend his summers going and working on film projects. He worked with Hitchcock. He worked on Mr. Rogers, for a little while as a younger person. So he worked in all these other departments to see how, and had exposure to how they're supposed to work. So he knew how they were supposed to work. He might not have been a master of the lighting department or the master of the electricity or whatever, or the electricians, but he knew what they were supposed to do. And he got people that knew what they were doing, and he was able to trust them to do what they needed to do and move on.
He was working with people at really the beginning of a lot of special effects work, and I was cracking up laughing. There was a YouTube video that was a series of commercials that he'd made for Calgon washing machine powder. So it's almost like a Magic School Bus idea where they're shrunk down into a little submarine ship that then goes inside the washing machine to see all the dirt and grime left behind, and in between the fibers of the clothes and everything.
The Calgon story. What happens when a Calgon research team and their submarine are reduced to micro size and sent on a dangerous mission deep inside a washing machine?
Engines reversed full, Captain. We're stuck.
We've got to find out what's on those fibers.
Trapped in the fibers of a giant T-shirt, the Calgonauts discover secrets of gray, dull-looking laundry.
Well, it feels like...
Leftover detergent film. The fibers are covered with this stuff.
Oh, this box has never been opened.
Add the Calgon.
You'll thrill as Calgon dissolves the dirty leftover detergent film.
It's working. The gray is gone. The fibers are clean.
Let's get out of here.
I think I'm in love with you.
If you're tired of dull detergent films and grade B washes, thrill to The Calgon Story at your nearby family washing machine.
It's people in a little ship and bobbing around, and, it was very early special effects, obviously. You didn't have any of the digital tools we have now.
But it's awesome.
It's awesome, and they looked complete. It was its own little washing machine world, and I think he does the same here, where there is never a moment where you don't feel like you're in a zombie apocalypse world.
Well, that, and because of his commercial background, so he knew how to shoot for television budget and scheduling. He knew how to shoot for commercial budget and scheduling, and because he was able to bring that to Dawn of the Dead with the limitations that they had, I think it also shows a real competency and master of the craft there.
There were a lot of practical effect things, both in some of the sets, especially ones that were meant to break or break away, and also in some of the costume pieces that were meant to rip or tear or give way. I could see a lot of the same kind of effects that I've used and that I've seen used in haunted houses.
Yeah.
So, he was definitely a hands-on guy that knew how to do the stuff himself. Even if he did have, obviously, by that time, a big crew helping to build and paint and do everything, he started from the ground up. And so I feel like when you do that, you have a respect for all the people working under you, because if you've done the job, you know how hard it really is and how hard they're working. And I'm sure that contributed in some ways, too, to the success of the film, because if you get a great leader like that who respects his workers and treats people well and respects their knowledge and lets them kind of go free and play with what they can do and really attempt to give their best, and you do that across the board, I think that's why you get a masterpiece like this.
What was the experience like seeing it on the big screen for you at the Hollywood?
Oh, that was so fun, because again, I'd seen it probably the equivalent of like 100-inch TV.
Okay.
I don't know if really there is such a thing, but you get what I mean size-wise. Because it was projected with a projector onto a big plain wall. And so I'd say it was pretty good quality. It wasn't like a brick wall or anything. It was a plain white wall, so that was pretty nice. But it was really fun to get to see it larger than life and have that kind of up-close feeling of, I almost want to lean back because I feel like blood's going to splatter at me,
It's interesting you say that, because as I had said earlier, I saw it during the 3D run.
Mm-hmm.
I never really felt that with the 3D version of it, but I had that same feeling this time around because it was restored and cleaned up and bigger and larger than life on that screen at the Hollywood, which is a pretty big screen, and we have great seats. And I remember feeling there's this one shot where Wooly, the guy who kind of loses his mind at the tenement building, is going in and shooting everybody, and he kicks the door in and just pulls the trigger and somebody's head explodes. I think all of us just kind of like, whoa, went back.
You lean away from it. I really respected the way you mentioned it had been cleaned up. It was cleaned up, but they didn't over clean it. They didn't sterilize it, I guess is the best way that I would put it. So you still had little bits, especially at the edges of, that old film feeling and stuff. But I could tell that they'd definitely done more cleaning in the center of the picture. And I remember there being one or two quarter of a second flashes of like, you could all see where film was taped together and stuff in the old version that I'd seen, which I'm sure wasn't cleaned up.
Oh, yeah.
It was like a VHS that was then cabled into the projector, so maybe not the best. Not digital, okay? Not digital, I guess is the point there. So it was really nice to see it cleaned up and get to see some of those details. What were your thoughts with the blood? Because this is something I know many people talk about. And it has to do with the cleaning up of the film.
Well, even
in a way.
Even before that, though, it still didn't look great.
Okay.
It looks like, I've heard a lot of people call it, it looks like a bunch of melted crayons.
Mm-hmm.
Like the color is not the best.
It's very bright.
It's very bright.
There's some very oxygenated zombies.
And my understanding is that most of the blood was a mix of dye and photographic development chemicals.
Interesting.
To get the consistency, but for whatever reason, it prevented it from getting to the nice dark tone that they were looking for. Plus, they were shooting in a mall. And while they did bring in their own lighting set up and everything, they still had to contend with the natural light of their location. And mall lighting isn't always the best. Sometimes it looks like melted red crayons to me.
For me, it made me wonder if because they were shooting in a darker location, because they were trying to do it fast, even though I'm sure they could take multiple nights. It wasn't like trying to shoot it all in one day or anything, but they did have to get through by a certain time so stuff could be cleaned up. And if anyone out there has cleaned up fake blood before, you know that it can be quite the mess.
Yeah.
I'm sure they probably had cleanup crews coming right behind them so they could continue to do shots and stuff on other scenes. But there's a little bit of a hurry. It makes me wonder if when he was watching the playback, like directors do, if the blood didn't look dark enough, and maybe it wasn't until they really got in the editing room that they realized
maybe
how much brighter it was,
maybe.
Because I've definitely had that experience on a couple projects I worked on where things looked darker or dimmer in small screen, just playing back the video. But then when I get into the editing booth or, on the computer and everything, I realize that they're actually much brighter and lighter.
Well, and in this case, too, it's not like you can just okay, cut, and then they go back to Video Village and watch the playback. They're dailies that have to be produced.
Right, exactly.
A day or two later, then they go and see. It's like, oh, well, I guess that's what we're doing.
I also wonder, because I don't remember the blood seeming that bright when I saw it in high school. And so I really wonder if some of the cleanup of the film made it a little brighter, and if just even the dailies, they're not watching them on a huge screen.
Right.
The screen is smaller. I'm wondering if, like many things, when you condense down to a smaller size, it may not look as bright.
That's true. And, maybe the fact that we were watching VHS tape that doesn't have the same pixel information or data information, image information, did kind of help past the unreality of the blood and all that. That said, I'm still not sure I'm a huge fan of the zombies looking that color.
The bluish?
Yeah, the bluish. It just, after a while, when I first saw it, it was with clips in that documentary.
Sure.
So they were just showing all the headshots.
Sure.
Or the dude getting ripped apart at the arm pressure machine.
Which I will say, the joints being ripped apart, the intestines, all very nice.
And those are real intestines.
Well, that would explain it.
Savini would use the real thing when he could. He would...
From
butcher shops.
Sheep or cows or something.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not human, though.
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, Day of the Dead is probably the worst example or best example of it. When they tear a guy in half, there's all this cow guts and stuff coming out. And there's a horror story. I know it's a different movie, but there's a horror story that has been told that they kept all that stuff in a freezer. And then everybody went on break for Christmas.
Oh, no.
Freezer got and all the zombies in the sea, they had to keep using it because, all the zombies in the scene were able to put like cotton in their nose.
Oh.
Because they're all distended and distorted and all that. But the human
couldn't. Yeah, just maybe a little Vaseline, and that's about all.
They put like strong cologne underneath his nostrils, and that was about the best he could do. So he's sitting there saying, choke on him, as the zombies are eating his guts. But he looks like he's about to throw up. And But yeah, the bit where the guy's getting his arm ripped off at the blood pressure machine and he's getting ripped up. Yeah, real intestines, which again makes the really fake looking blood and the fake looking skin tone look even more out of place, but kind of cartoony at this point because the color is different.
To be fair though, why he went back to get his blood pressure taken when there were zombies coming was a little unclear to me.
As a kid, I thought those machines were the coolest thing ever.
Oh, me too. But he knew zombies were coming at that point. Like, he'd done it earlier, and then it was so cool that he was willing to risk it. Anyway, there's small things like that. But I guess I really loved, though, just the whole idea of this place that we think is such a safe, happy temple to capitalism, if you will. And Romero, in at least the documentary that I watched, he talked about, this is a comment on commercialism and capitalism, and why do the zombies come here? Well, it's just, I don't know, memories of their past life or habit or what they're used to doing.
It was an important place in their lives.
It was an important place in their lives. Like, really? A shopping mall? And shopping malls were fairly new then. That was a new concept. In fact, the mall that it's filmed in was one of the first enclosed shopping malls in the country. And so getting to use that, I think, was extra neat in that way.
Yeah. Now, when we got out of the theater, we were talking, and you expressed to me that you had trouble with one portion of the film. And I wonder if some of the cleanup extended to some of the audio mix as well, because I also had a hard time actually understanding some of the dialogue that was being spoken. I knew what the dialogue was because I'd seen that movie so many times.
Sure.
The opening sequence in the TV station, it was pure chaos.
Yes.
And while I appreciate that, things would break down and go into chaos mode, you seem to struggle with it.
I did not like that scene. It felt like they wanted to create chaos, but I don't know. It felt too chaotic. People felt too out of control. For a point in time when there weren't actual zombies in the room with them, they were just filming a news program or sort of a debate about the issue, if you will, between these two guys. They seemed to be panicking too much for me. It felt like everyone in the room was panicking, whereas I've seen documentaries about newsrooms and documentaries about the covering of other major disasters, if you will. If you look at this as just like a natural disaster that occurred, the natural disaster happens to be a virus instead of an earthquake or a fire or whatever. Or even disasters that are man-made. I've seen a documentary that had a bunch of footage from the newsroom in New York on 9/11.
Sure.
And it wasn't this crazy chaos. It was actually this very tense, calm, like this quiet tenseness that everyone was just waiting for what would happen next and very attentive to their job and really trying to do their best so that they could bring the news out to the people and have the coverage. I don't know if things were that much different in the 70s than now, but it felt like the people in the newsroom were being very unprofessional.
Okay.
And I feel like news professionals, they're used to stress. They report on high-stakes stuff all the time. It didn't feel right. Didn't ring true to me, and honestly made me feel a little bit panicked and queasy and
not in a good way.
Not in a good way.
Not in the way the film intended. Because you are supposed to feel the chaos. I get that.
Yeah, I get the chaos. Like, there are other parts of the film where zombies are coming from multiple directions and it's chaotic and the characters are looking for a weapon to grab, anything to grab, a pole, a stick, anything they can, thwack them with, a book, whatever. That's fine. This felt like whoever wrote the scene didn't know what went on in a newsroom. And that surprised me, knowing the background.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. For me, I don't know. I mean, like I said, I knew what the dialogue was supposed to be because I had heard it before, but I do feel like the sound mix was a little...
There was also, so much interference that
overly muddled.
You couldn't hear the primary dialogue clearly. And that, I think, is always a failing in the sound design and in the direction. Because, you know what? Extras can shut up and then still move their mouth, and it's fine. Or, they don't need to be having full voice conversations in the background. And there was just a lot of that going on. It felt like someone was attempting to create the feeling of chaos, but instead of having to nail down this intense, dramatic feeling of quiet tenseness and everyone waiting for what's going to happen next, instead it was like, okay, everybody throw your papers in there and scream and run around and be chaotic. It had that kind of a feel instead, which seemed disingenuous. But that was the only part where I had that issue with it.
And I've not had that experience watching it on VHS, DVD, or Blu-ray.
And maybe that was the difference, that because it was on such a big screen.
Maybe.
You say that, and especially when we were younger, there is a bigger aspect ratio difference.
Yeah.
So if we watched it like at home, or even the projector that I watched it on at time at school, it was cutting off the sides, because TVs, for those of you who are young enough to not remember this, used to be a different aspect ratio. They were more square. They were still a rectangle, but they were more square.
The dreaded pan and scan.
Yeah, less. So either if you showed something on a widescreen, you'd get black bars on the sides, or if you showed a movie that was done in widescreen, because of course movies are, then it would just cut off the sides of the movie.
Romero didn't really shoot with a huge picture like that, but I can definitely see where some of it would be cut down as well. That's the scene, or that sequence, that bit is where the cameo is. Did you catch the cameo? Do you know what Romero looks like well enough to know, hey, that's him?
Yes, I did know.
And the woman sitting next to him was Christine. Yeah. I know that there were some versions of this released to home media, whether it was VHS, it would have to be VHS, where it picks up after that.
Oh.
I remember
interesting.
One birthday year, I decided I was going to sit down and watch all the Romero Dead movies from start to finish one morning, starting with Night and going all the way through Land. Because at that point, Land of the Dead was the last film.
Okay.
And we were watching it, and I had it all planned out by time, so if people didn't want to come for the whole thing, they didn't have to. My buddy Aaron came over to watch Dawn of the Dead, because that was one of his favorites as well. And he was shocked. He told me that he had never seen any of this stuff with the TV station or anything. They picked up at the tenement building.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I had no idea there was a version of this movie out there that had that cut.
Mm-hmm.
I knew there were other cuts. Argento has a cut, and even the version we saw didn't have every bit of footage. There was a little bit of dialogue cut in the helicopter ride and some other stuff at the docks, but that's fine. I thought it was great to see it on the big screen, and we were all in it, man. We were all there, and I was waiting for somebody to start snickering when the cream pies came out for the food fight sequence. But nobody did. We were all into it, man.
I loved it.
I wonder how many people there had never seen it before.
Oh.
No, we didn't ask. Nobody really asked. There was nobody introducing the film. I don't know if anybody had seen it for the first time, but by the time we were done, man, we were all together.
That would have been a fun, I think it was only the second time I'd seen it, and I had a fantastic time. As always, the Hollywood, great presentation, that great big screen. Now, this one was in 35? Was it 35 months?
No, this was a digital.
This was digital.
I went digital because it had been restored.
That's right. Okay. Well,
but it was restored by Vinegar Syndrome, and they take very good care.
They did a fantastic job with it. It still felt like a movie from the late 70s.
Yeah.
It wasn't so cleaned up that it didn't feel like itself anymore, and I really appreciate that.
Someday we're going to go to the Monroeville Mall. We're going to check that.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think there's any stores left. Penny's might still be there, but it's going to look different.
Ooh, not for long. We better hurry.
Yeah, I don't know. But someday we got to get to the Monroeville Mall.
Absolutely.
We got to go make the trek and pay homage. I have seen the elevator door, one of the elevator doors, because that was in the Living Dead Museum in Evansville. And it's got blood from the set, and some of the actors had signed it over the years.
I tell you, man, that blood is so hard to get rid of.
Yeah. But someday we'll go to Monroeville. I'll take you to the Evans City Cemetery from Night of the Living Dead. Sometime this month in May, the Hollywood is showing Day of the Dead.
Yeah, I saw that.
Do you want to go?
Ooh, more zombies? Let's do it.
If you're fashion-minded, watch out. Big-time shopping is finally here. Monroeville Mall.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Monster Kid Radio. Thanks for coming along for the ride with us this week and giving us a chance to dive into something a little outside the Monster Kid Radio wheelhouse. If you have any thoughts about Dawn of the Dead, zombie movies in general, or anything like that, I would love for you to contribute to the show in the form of your own listener feedback.
Have something you'd like to share with Monster Kid Radio? You can email the podcast at monsterkidradio@gmail.com, or you can call and leave a voicemail at 360-524-2484.
You can find out more about Monster Kid Radio by going to monsterkidradio.net. Everything you need to know about the podcast is right there, including links to places like The Shadow over Portland if you want to check out what Chris McMillan is up to. And our Amazon affiliate link. If you're going to buy anything from Amazon, please consider using that link because it helps us out just a little bit. You're also going to find links to our Facebook page, our Facebook group, our Twitter, our Reddit, our Discord, and our Patreon. Patreon members just got a special video release, about a half-hour discussion with my wife Beth and I about the new movie Monster Mash. If you were a patron of any level on Patreon, over at patreon.com/monsterkidradio, you got to see that video when it was released. You were also made aware of a special deal you can get on any of the shirts over at teamdeath.com. Under the Death Designs label there, you can get any of those shirts at a special price if you're a patron. What's coming up next week here on the show? Well, I'm going to be joined by a new voice, but a podcaster, somebody that you might have heard before. His name's Vincent, and he's from the Camp Kaiju podcast, and he and I are going to talk about our top 3 Jack Arnold films. We'll talk about Jack Arnold overall, of course, but I'm eager to do another top 3 list. It's been a long time since I've done one, so it's going to be fun to talk about Jack Arnold with Vincent. And as I've been saying, I'm challenging myself personally to talk about my top 3 favorite Jack Arnold directorial projects without talking about anything Creature from the Black Lagoon related. I know it's going to be tough, but I've got a list. I'm narrowing it down, and I'll have it down to 3 with some honorable mentions next week here on the show.
Monster Kid Radio is a Team Death production. All original content of Monster Kid Radio is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 Unported license. You can learn more about Team Death or other projects like Death Designs, Mail Order Zombie, Monster Kid Writer, and more at www.teamdeath.com. Remember, death is spelled D-E-T-H. That's teamdeath.com. Please rate and review Monster Kid Radio wherever you download your favorite podcasts.
The 48ers is copyright 2024, Desert Undertones. You can find it on their brand new EP release, Massacre Canyon, which you can pick up over at desertundertones.bandcamp.com. Follow the link in the show notes or go straight to their Bandcamp page and let them know that you heard about them here on Monster Kid Radio. My name's Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week. Ciao.